Okay, greetings, friends. Today I want to discuss a distinction, a concept that I think can be very useful for a lot of people out there. One that's been very useful for me. I have a concrete example of something that I generally see discussed in a way that I feel is often too nebulous and too abstract to actually be useful to most people. The general concept that I am referring to is the idea of the ego as a false self. Now, if you are a person who has read spiritual ideas, just ideas even of general self-improvement, you'll commonly hear people talk about the ego and learning to control or separate yourself from your ego. Now, when the ego is discussed in this way, it's not meant the way that the term is used conversationally, because people usually will use the term, in casual conversation. Ego has kind of become a synonym for arrogance. But that's not the way it's meant in this sense. It's also, as a side track, that's not the way that Freud meant it either, or any psychologist mean it. But anyway, so ego in this context, your ego is your false self. Your ego is the accretion of life experiences and limiting beliefs that you cultivate through your existence. A good way, or a good aspect of, or a good example of what a false ego is, if you're growing up and you have a mother or father or sibling who repeatedly tells you something over and over and over again, those words kind of become embedded somewhere in your psyche. And they run in your head like a script all the time. It's like JavaScript running in your head all the time. So much so that you're no longer aware of it. But you just take it to be part of who you are, right? Now that's the important thing, that when you are at a lower level of consciousness in your day, you identify with your ego so completely that you think it's you, right? In a lot of people who don't ever choose to look outside of what's generally considered reality and consciousness and mind, a lot of people will just live in the ego forever, and you will always think that's who you are. It's probably also appealing for people whose ego takes them to places that are very successful, because it's like, hey, the ego got me here. Why would I want to achieve any separation from this thing that has gotten me here? But that's what's meant by the ego. And for now, that's only as deep as we need to go to it. So your ego is this false sense of who you are. It's kind of like a fake identity. But you very much think it's you. And when you begin exploring your mind in consciousness and maybe delving into things that are called spirituality, one of the first things you'll encounter is these ideas of the ego and how you have to achieve separation from your ego, mastery of your ego. Some schools will say like you have to get rid of your ego entirely, destroy your ego entirely. I think that's kind of debatable. But still, the general concept is pretty consistent. But when you talk about that, it's hard, especially if you're somebody who has never achieved any separation from your ego. It's hard to understand, like, what does that actually mean? It sounds very ambiguous and very nebulous. And before I go on, let me quickly say, I'm not a guru. I'm not even close to a guru. I'm just a dude who has spent a lot of time on these kinds of things. I've learned a couple tools that have helped me, and so I figure they could help other people. But I am by no means a guru. I always try to stress that, for two reasons. Number one, just because I'm not a guru. But number two, because there's so many fake-ass gurus on the internet right now, and I don't want to be lumped in with. I don't want to become one of them. I think it's a trick of the ego a lot of times. If you've done a little bit in this area and then you start like broadcasting it on YouTube, I think ironically, the ego ends up sweeping you up and you end up thinking you're way more than what you are. So I'm just a dude, but I'm a dude who's got a couple experiences that maybe could be useful for people. So with this nebulous concept of the ego, I find that it's often discussed in a way that is so nebulous and so ambiguous that it's useless to people. But I recently had an experience that I thought, man, this is a great way to help myself really conceptualize it, but then to help other people. I had this experience while I was running. It's a few days ago, I think last week, I was running, and it sucked, man. It wasn't a good run. I'm actually about to go running in a little bit, thinking back to the beginning of that run, because it wasn't a fun run. It was really humid out. The heat wasn't too bad, but it was really humid, and my legs just felt like they were full of battery acid. My legs felt like they're 200 pounds. You know, anybody out there who's a runner, you know what I mean. You just have some of those runs that just suck. And so I'm running down the road thinking, dude, this run is going to suck. Now, I never thought I'm going to quit, right? That's not something that I allow into my mind. Once I set myself on a course, I'm going to complete it. But I was thinking, okay, I'm going to complete this run, but it's going to suck. And then as I'm running, I see two people up ahead walking on the road. And so when I see those people, I immediately feel my ego start going, hey dude, you gonna look like a little bitch running by those people? You want to look like a little weakling running by these people, looking like you're sucking, you're all hunched over, breathing all heavy, running at the slow ass pace. You want those people to see that? So that's my ego talking to me, right? Now for me, number one, that's an example of what is meant by the idea of the ego being this false self. But what I often do, the way that I play with these things and with the ego, I don't look at the ego as being something that needs to be destroyed. I look at the ego, what I am trying to get to and what I occasionally achieve, what I would like to achieve as my 100% regular state of being, is to choose whether or not to use the ego. Use it like a tool. And what I mean is, so I'm running and I'm thinking, well, I'm hurting, I'm sucking. And there's the ego going, you're going to let this happen? You're going to let this... Now, at that point, I could have said, shut up, ego. Shut up, ego. I'm not going to play this game. I don't need to care about what these people think. Because my ego is a very, very competitive ego. And my ego is very, very concerned with not looking like a weakling and a loser in front of people. And so I had a choice, right? But the thing is, in that case, why would I not want to use my ego? The ego is useful in that case, right? And so there's this is all happening like in a couple seconds in my head, right? Running. It's like, nah, dude. I'm going to take the ego. The ego, that's a tool. And by embracing that ego, embracing that part of myself, that competitive part of myself, it's going to help. And it did. I embraced that, immediately said, I'm not going to look like a bitch in front of these people. So I straightened up my posture, started running. I still hurt. My body still hurt. But I forced myself to look like I didn't hurt. And here's the really interesting thing. One of the best ways to change your state is to change your posture, but it's easy to forget that, especially when you're in a really negative state. But one of the easiest ways to trigger a more positive and powerful state is to just change your posture, right? And so I changed my posture. I ran by those people. Hey, good morning. Like if you looked at me, you would have thought like, oh, dude, this guy's on the first leg of a 20-miler today. He's feeling strong, feeling good. But the interesting thing was, once I blew past him, a little while up the road, I did start to feel good. And the second half of my run was much better than my first half, which says a lot of interesting things about the mind-body connection, right? But the concept there, the useful thing there, is that was my ego. My ego is a very competitive thing, right? And I chose to embody it. I chose to embrace it, and it was helpful in that in that situation. But there are other situations where that ego is not only not helpful, but is very, very detrimental to the people around me, to myself. And those are times when it is definitely better to maintain that separation between myself and my ego. Now, when I say these are the times in my day when I am capable of such separation. Because again, I'm not a guru, and I'm not trying to pass myself off as one of these fake ass internet gurus. But I have worked a lot on this, and I have achieved a level to where I do spend a portion of my day where I am acting and behaving objectively and outside of my ego. I also have a very bad temper, and when that triggers, that is when it's very hard for me to achieve separation from my ego. I'm saying that just because, again, I never ever want to come across as a guru or somebody pretending to be a guru. But yeah, so it's a very useful distinction, and I think it's a good concrete example of what is often presented as a very nebulous and ambiguous term or concept. And so I just wanted to share it. I also wanted to say very quickly as another useful thing, if you're still listening, you do find these kinds of ideas useful. Running is a great way to foster personal development, but even spiritual development. But I think you don't even have to run to get the fruits of this, because I'm about to explain why. And I think explaining this as a runner, explaining this concept can still be useful to you, even if you yourself don't run. Though, I want to stress, I think you do need to viscerally experience these things to really grasp them. But hearing them intellectually can be a good starting point. So when you're running, right, running is a great way to teach yourself about achieving goals. And the reason is because, say you're running, you're at the end of a run, and you're thinking in your mind, dude, I don't have another mile in me. I literally physically don't have a mile in me. I can't do this, right? But you can trick yourself and you can say, well, I don't have a mile in me, but I can make it to that next driveway. And as soon as I get to that driveway, I'm just going to stop, because then I really am done. But then you get to the driveway and you go, all right, dude, I made it to the driveway. I can get to this mailbox, all right? I get to the mailbox. All right, I got to the mailbox. All right, dude, I can make it to the next crossroads, you know? And you trick yourself that way all the way until you make it the whole mile. Now, in its simplest sense, that's a great way it's a great concrete way to conceptualize achieving goals, because that's how goals are. Most of our goals that are worthwhile are too big. They're overwhelming. But you don't need to go for that full mile. You don't need to go for the goal. Just go to the next driveway. Go to the next little piece of thing that you can accomplish. And by going from driveway to crossroad to mailbox to tree, all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you made it. You've made it, right? So that's useful. But it's also useful on a deeper and spiritual sense. Because what happened to me, now I have experienced this both in sitting meditation and in running. But it was in running that was the thing that most started to help me viscerally understand these things and create separation between my observing self and my ego self. And the reason is because as you're running, I used to run really long distances. I was really into long distance running. I would sometimes compete, but I mainly just did it because I loved doing it. I probably will go back to doing it because it's a great mind exercise, but I had a series of foot and leg injuries that knocked me out, but maybe I'll work myself back up to it. But anyway, I used to love running long distances, 15, 20 miles, a couple days a week, and 15 to 20 mile runs 2 days a week about. And so on those runs, right, there are many moments when you're on those runs where your body's like, all right, dude, I'm kind of at my limit right now. And you do the game that I just said, you're like, all right, well, make the next driveway, next crossroads, blah, blah, blah. And then the next thing you know, you make it to a certain point, your body's like, actually, I'm feeling pretty good, and you can keep going. But the thing that had happened to me on some of those runs was I'd be running, and I'd be doing the game in my head. And then all of a sudden become really conscious of this idea of if all of this is me, if this is all in my brain, then who is tricking what, right? How does that make sense? How can you trick yourself if you are a perfectly cohesive whole? That doesn't make any sense, right? There has to be some kind of separation. This part of me that is seeing and tricking this other part is separate from this other part, right? How is that possible? What does that mean about the mind? What does that mean about how our brains actually work? And when you feel that, you can start to gain more separation, and you start to really see what it actually means to say your ego is your false self. because you realize that you're outside and you're tricking your ego, or sometimes it's your ego tricking this other part of yourself, but then you get to where you're watching your ego trick this other part of yourself. Gnarly, crazy, far out stuff. But the cool thing about it is that it really, it makes it visceral, this fact that you have different selves and that your mind is compartmentalized. And as you see that, then you can really begin to get into this idea of having this observing true self and what it means, what your false ego is, what that actually means. It's really, really powerful. I've also had it sometimes in sitting meditation, but I don't know if I would have achieved it in sitting meditation if I hadn't achieved it in running, because it was in the physical activity that I really started to truly experience and grasp these things. And then, it's like once you see them, you can apply them at other times, including during things like sitting meditation. So anyway, these are distinctions that I'm hoping are useful for any of you out there. And they've been very useful for me, and I just wanted to share them. So from one dude to a bunch of other people out there, that's all. No guru here. All right, peace out, everybody.